All right, I think we'll get started. It's 1 minute after 11, so while people are still joining, let's just begin. For everyone, I want to say welcome to our first webinar of the SONNET project. Just to mention that right at the beginning, the whole webinar will be recorded, and there will be the recording also available online later. So I will be moderating the session today. My name is Niklas Moszkowski. I'm working for the European Secretariat of ECLE, together with Olga Krajewska, who's my colleague at ECLE. She will be joining us today, and she will be managing any questions that arise during the webinar. All right, so to start with, let's have a brief look at what we're going to do today. So basically, I want to briefly touch upon the project. What is the SONNET project about? And then we're going to have 3 inputs from our 3 speakers, which is Julia Wittmeyer from Drift, Jana de Forsch from the City of Antwerp, and Donald Brown from the University of Leeds, whom I'm going to present later on. And we're going to have several occasions to ask questions, and we also prepared some polls to have the session a bit more interactive. And to start with, before talking about the SONNET project, we would actually like to see who's with us today, where are you guys coming from, what's your background, and then try to see also where we can lead maybe the discussions from that. So we're going to start the first poll now, which is going to ask, what context do you work in? And there you go. You have 5 options, as you can see. Municipality, university, private company, NGO, or EU institution. We would have liked to add just an open field for other, but we only can offer you 5 options. So please just feel free to tick your box, and then we'll go ahead. This looks already good. Most people have voted. We'll just wait a couple more seconds. All right, and I think that should be fine. Last chance if you haven't. And then let's see the results. And there we go. Okay, so we're quite a research crowd today, I would say. Over half of you work in university or research contexts. Then we have 7% from municipal context, which is interesting also. For today, 12% from companies, 24% from NGO, and also 2% from EU institutions. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. So I think with that in mind, we can have a bit of a feeling with whom we're talking today also. So then let's have a look. Oh yeah, one last mention. We have this control pane. Each of you should see that on the right or upper corner of your screen. And there you have this questions section where you can enter questions. So whenever during the session, during the presentations, you have any questions, please feel free to put them in there so we can collect them and then pick them up during the Q&A sessions. All right, so then let's briefly look at the project. So SONNET stands for Social Innovation in Energy Transitions. And it builds upon city labs in 6 cities across Europe. So city labs are kind of experimental, real-life laboratories where we want to experiment with these social innovations in these case cities, which namely are Bristol in the UK, Mannheim in Germany, Antwerp in Belgium, Grenoble in France, Warsaw in Poland, and Basel in Switzerland. One of the key activities is the mapping and typology building of social innovation in energy transitions. And we're looking at 500 examples of social innovation in energy, which is abbreviated with SIE, as you might stumble across it sooner or later today. And this is also what we're going to look at in the beginning of this webinar today. And then further on, we want to identify and analyze enabling and impeding conditions for social innovations in energy. And finally, also to have a look at their potential for larger scale energy transitions. And part of that will be to look at development of business models and identification of market opportunities. And on the latter one, we will also have the presentation of Donald at the end of the webinar. So then to start with, our first speaker will be Julia Wittmeier. Oh yeah, any further information is of course on the website, which you find there. So Julia works for the Dutch Research Institute for Transitions, as already mentioned. She's also assistant professor at the Erasmus School of Social and Behavioral Sciences in Rotterdam. And her background is in social and cultural anthropology. And she focuses mainly on the changing role of science in cities and neighborhoods. And she works as the principal investigator in the SONNET project and is also the primary contact for the city of Antwerp. And with this, I now want to give the word to Julia, who is going to present to us the mapping and typology. You should have control over the screen. Just try if it works.
Not yet. Okay, thank you. Hello, everybody. Good morning. It's a shame I can't see you, Ella, peeking into living rooms and other kind of personal rooms. Of course, the occasion is not such a nice one, but we are happy to have you around for this sneak preview into social innovation in energy. I'm going to be providing you some insights into the work that we have been doing as part of the SONNET project on the mapping and the typology development. Because at the start, when we're thinking about social innovations in energy, and also if you talk about social innovations in energy, what people sort of respond and come back to you with is that, oh, you know, this is community energy, this is about civic engagement, about bottom-up initiatives in energy. And we were, you know, hold on, this cannot be the whole story. So basically, one of the questions that we are looking at in the SONNET project is really, and now I should get my next slide. Nicholas, I think you have to help me with the slides. My question, or the question that we ask in SONNET is, what is social innovation in energy and what are different types of social innovation in energy? Next slide, please. So the definition that we use is based on previous research that we have been doing on social innovation in different contexts. And it basically considers social innovation in energy as a combination of ideas, objects, and or actions, sort of a configuration of these three things that then change social relations and involve new ways of doing thinking and organizing energy. To give you an example, could you please click? When you think about community energy, again, it would be a configuration of these ideas, objects, and or actions. So basically the cooperative organization of the production of energy that involves new relations between consumers and producers, but also between neighbors or between local governments and citizens. Yeah, and it involves new ways of doing, so renewable energy production. The next one, new ways of thinking, so new knowledges that you need to do this, but also new ways of framing, such as the prosumer, and also new ways of organizing, such as the cooperative mode of governance. Next slide, please. So our basic understanding of social innovation then is that there are changes in social relations and that have a clear link with and a focus on energy. And in SONNET, we mean, or we focus on electricity and heat, if we say energy. But what we also want to stress is that social innovation is not necessarily about something new, or something that's entirely new to the universe. Basically, it's something that is new in a specific context. So it can be a renewed phenomena, or also something that is reinvented. Second, we want to stress that social innovation, we approach it as something that's multi-directional. Could we have a research crowd here? What we mean with that is basically to say that social innovation, we consider or approaches it as something that's not inherently good as such, but rather we want to question to which ends does it actually contribute, and for whom are these ends the good ones or not. So basically there's different normativities underlying these social innovations, and we want to make them explicit and debatable. And the third point we want to make is that social innovations don't necessarily need to originate in a grassroots context or in a civic or community context. They can also originate within the public sphere, so within municipalities, for example, but also within the private sphere. Next slide, please. So based on that understanding, our question is, what are different types of SIE? Next slide. And to come up with a typology, what we did, we went back to our definition and we're thinking about, okay, when we think about changes in social relations, what are these social relations that we're talking about? So sociologists have been looking into this by differentiating at least 4 different types of interaction. They're thinking about how people cooperate towards a shared goal, so interact through cooperation. They have been looking at exchanging, also reciprocity belongs that under this category. They have been looking at how people compete for scarce resources with one another, but also if they are competing but not following shared rules anymore, that we would be calling conflict, so they would use means that are not necessarily the agreed upon ones. Next slide, please. So, and then the second part of our, or the third part of our definition, basically these new ways of doing, thinking, and organizing. So we take the social relations as well as these activities as a starting point for thinking about the typology. Next slide, please. And come up with a matrix that goes 4 by 3 and lets us end up with 12 types of social innovation in energy. If we would be just putting in the types here, it would be a rather abstract and theoretical endeavor. So you could end up with, between cooperation and doing, you could end up with a type that's called cooperative action, for example, or between competition and thinking, it could be something like competing frames. But rather than introducing in that abstract level, what I wanted to do today is to provide you with sort of the more empirical examples that we, or categorizations that we encountered. What we did, click please, is that we mapped 500 social innovation initiatives across 8 European countries that you see on your slide. And what we have done with the social innovation initiatives, you can basically think of, for example, an energy cooperative in the Netherlands. And then we were looking at these examples and saying, okay, what are these configurations of ideas, actions, and objects that these initiatives are working on? So they're, for example, working on cooperatively organizing energy production. So we would extract from each of these 500 initiatives their configuration that they're working on, and then we cluster these configurations across our 12 types. And the next slide, please. That made us end up with 18 different clusters of social innovations in energy. I give you some moments to digest the diversity of social innovations in energy that you see on that slide. And should give you some navigation. Basically, if you look at the upper left, the cooperation doing, that's where you find the community energy, the energy cooperatives, sort of that what is usually referred to as social innovation. You can also find other issues that have been coming up lately, such as the peer-to-peer electricity exchange, and that have been looked at also from a social science perspective on there as cluster 4 on the exchange and doing. You can find energy gamification and nudges, which is quite hot in other or in specific areas and disciplines. But you also find stuff like for-profit consulting, and you're thinking like, why is this a social innovation? What would be socially innovative about that? So what this overview basically shows you is that Social innovation is a context-dependent phenomena. So in order to be able to say whether or not, whether to say to which extent something is socially innovative, we need to look at the context within which it is situated. So we have been mapping in Poland as well as in the Netherlands and in the UK and in Switzerland, all countries with very different contexts when it concerns the energy system. And that also is what you see back in the variety that we can show here. So this does not mean that every for-profit consulting is a social innovation, but it means that social innovations or socially innovative configurations are acting as for-profit consulting, and there they do to a certain extent change the social relations existing in that very system. Okay, I have some minutes left, and then I want to just provide you with a glimpse into 3 of these examples, just go a bit deeper into them. Next slide, please. And the first one is participatory experimentation and incubation. Next slide, please. And basically what we mean there and what we have found here is that there's many spaces that are facilitated and that are driven by multi-actors constellations, so universities, cities, citizens, so there are constellations of different actors, and they aim to spark new ideas, new projects. They want to showcase experiments. They're really sort of spaces for incubation and for experimentation. They're not only spaces for dialogue, that is a different type, they're really there to experiment and try out different possible solutions. Examples are living labs, urban labs, transdisciplinary collaborations, or triple helix. And what these multi-actor constellations in there do, they work together, teamwork towards a shared goal. And they organize kind of the seedbed for possible further action or different frameworks. Next slide, please. The second example is the campaigns against specific energy pathways. Next slide, please. And I chose that one because it's one of those on the conflict column, and basically I want to show what that means. Usually, when you think about these kind of initiatives, but also their underlying configurations, is that we think of social movements. This is what social movements are doing. Yes, that's what they are doing. So they're doing peaceful opposition, protests, and campaigns. And what they're against specific energy pathways. They're, so for example, against coal, or they're against nuclear, but they're also against, for example, smart meters. So that's where the multi-directionality comes in. Others are very much for, so they're advocating certain solutions, but this whole conflict column are basically is against a certain framing. Next slide, please. And the last example I want to introduce is investment and finance mechanisms. Next slide. And that also means not to say that every investment and finance mechanism is basically meaning schemes for accessing money are socially innovative. They can be socially innovative to the extent they actually change social relations. That are, for example, subsidies that are written in a way that they force people to cooperate and thereby create new relations and new roles between them, or their municipalities taking up the role of banks through municipal bonds, for example. Yeah, it's basically mostly in support for certain energy solutions, and it's driven by a range of different actors. Crowdfunding platforms would also be part of this type. Donald will tell more about that one. Next slide. And I hope to have stayed within my 10 minutes and have given you a glimpse on what it is that we have been looking at. You can find more information on all the other types on our website. And within the SONNET project, our next step is to take 4 of these types and to work more in depth with them through case study work. Thank you very much for your attention.
All right, thank you a lot, Julia. I think this opened very nicely kind of the horizon that we're looking at when talking about social innovation and energy. We'll have you with us later again for our discussions. So for now, let's say bye-bye and talk to you in a bit again. Yeah, as all of you heard, this typology is also online. It should be in the chat, also the link, if you want to have a look at it right now. Before we start now with the second speaker, we also want to pick up briefly this, this typology and just get a first kind of impression also about what you think about this. So just, yeah, one can also already see Jana. Just maybe let's have a quick poll first. So the next poll would be, which types of interaction do you believe to hold the greatest potential for energy transitions at the city level? And we just picked those 4 that we also just saw in the presentation. And yeah, just with a gut feeling, maybe make your choice, and let's see what the crowd thinks. And this looks already quite clear. There's still some people left. Okay. Last few seconds. Just trust your gut feeling, don't think too much. Okay, but this looks clear already. So let's see the results. And there you go. So this is, yeah, as I said, quite clear. 70% would say cooperation is the way forward, and then 42 on exchange, 12 on competition, and 7 on conflict. All right, so with this in mind, I would like to introduce our next speaker, which is Jana de Forge from the city of Antwerp. Jana has a PhD in social sciences, also from the University of Antwerp, and since 2014, she's been working with the city as a European project manager for energy and environment projects. She's also currently a project leader in the so-called Stadslab 2050, about which she will talk now. And yeah, she's lead for the city of Antwerp within the SONNET project, and her interests lie in social innovation, of course, also urban living lab, methodology, and the energy transition. So thank you, Jana, a lot for being with us. And I am curious to hear the city perspective on all of this. And the floor is yours.
Good morning. My name is Jana from the city of Antwerp. City of Antwerp is the second city in Belgium after Brussels. We have 520,000 inhabitants from over 170 nationalities. We are a growing city, and we would like to be and work in an innovative way on energy. I don't think the clicking works with me, so maybe you should. Okay, the next slide, thank you. I would like to share our ideas on 4 topics today. As all cities in Europe, we have climate goals that demand an energy transition. Antwerp is at the same time confronted with an energy poverty challenge. We have also some experiences with City Lab methodology, as I will explain later. And this is a social innovation and an innovative way of governance for our local climate policy. This includes new ways of thinking, doing, and organizing energy, as Julia also explained. And we work not only on energy, but also on other climate-related challenges in this way. We think that for tackling a challenge like energy poverty on the one hand, but on the same time also the energy transition, we think that that urban living labs are a good method, and that is what we will also do in the SONNET project. Next slide, please. So as I said, City of Antwerp is working on a climate plan. A large part of this plan is on mitigation. The central aim is becoming a climate neutral city in 2050. And this is a challenge in a growing city. To achieve these CO2 targets we have set in the Covenant of Mayors, this energy transition is essential. And from the urban perspective, we must consume less energy, but at the same time also move to more locally produced low carbon energy. And the solutions for this energy transition are extremely complex. They involve different players, different actors. They have uncertain outcomes. And if we want to achieve these climate goals, we know that important systems in our society will have to make a change. And the energy system is definitely one of them. And this has to be a change in structure. How do we organize it, but also in culture and in working methods. That is why STASLab 2050, our living lab, is the way to provide an answer to this complementary, of course, to existing policy. Next slide, please. Okay, so as I said, energy poverty is also a very challenging topic for Antwerp, and that is why we would like to focus on this topic also in the SONNET project. First thing that is clear to everybody, I think, is that the energy transition is not easy and it will have a cost. Secondly, we also research revealed that in Antwerp, 20 to 30% of our families suffer from energy poverty. This means that first, or they cannot pay their energy bills, or in other situations, people just underconsume, so they stay without heating, for example, because they fear the cost. Or thirdly, the family is in a situation that the energy takes such a big share of their budget that it brings them to a poverty situation. We also see that investments in renewable energy and in energetic renovation are not accessible for all. It is today still the happy few that can invest in solar panels. So with the SONNET project, we will take up these challenges in the urban living lab we have, and we will work in the coming 2 years on 5 concrete interventions, experiments that will test solutions for this described problem. The general aim of this activity is, of course, to see how we can support a more just energy transition in Antwerp. Next slide, please. As said, we have experience with the City Lab methodology, which is a social innovation, as Julia explained before. Antwerp has its own lab since 2013, which is called STASLab 2050. You see our nice logo in the corner below. You can have a look at the website, which is also only partly in English. Most is in Dutch, but still there are some parts in English. The lab starts from urban challenges linked to a sustainable city. As the name says, the aim is a climate neutral city in 2050. These urban challenges that the lab works on are very diverse. It can be about climate change, but also about adding green and blue in the city, on circular economy, sustainable entrepreneurship, involvement of disadvantaged groups in ecological teams, as we do now, for example, sustainable food, all kinds of topics. The thing that already since 2013, the many experiments in STASLab 2050 share are 3 characteristics. There has to be an innovative power in the experiment. There is multi-actor involvement. The city does not do it alone. We do it in partnerships. And 3, there is future potential learnings. The next slide, please. We will explore these challenges more systematically in coordination with a number of actors. I will maybe explain this by an example. In the framework of the SONNET Living Lab, we would like to see if we can stimulate local citizen communities and make them more accessible to everybody. So what we do is we bring people together, we will rethink the problem, and we will develop solutions in co-creation. We will support innovators in this field, and we give the citizens and energy communities more space and opportunities in the city. By doing this, we will work on several goals at the same time, on climate and energy goals, more low carbon, locally produced energy, but also social goals like social cohesion in the neighborhood, supporting local green economy, more affordable green energy for all citizens. We will learn from concrete experiments like this on the ground, and then we work on scaling them up. Next slide, please. So STASLab 2050 has 3 goals. Every experiment works on solve, learn, and connect. Can you click maybe one more time? Thank you. So through experiments in the field, we will find ways to collectively tackle these challenges related to sustainability. Solving, so we will work by ideation and prototyping. We look for challenges that are specific and limited in scope. For example, the challenge of citizens' energy communities and making them accessible for everybody. Step 2 is then involving as many stakeholders as possible. These are citizens, companies, academics, producers, institutions, government officials, and we bring them all together in one room, and we will then turn this challenge inside out and seek for an entirely new way of looking at the problem. By experimenting new combinations of insights and resources, we are able to see what works and what does not work. And if sometimes some things seem as a great success, we will try to scale them up. But in many other occasions, we also see that things do not go as expected and we fail in our experiments. But we like to learn from this failure, because that's already also a very good result, a failure where you can learn from. The second thing is learning. We like to learn through knowledge development. We do not merely focus on the experiment of the result as such. So CO2 is not our main goal, but we also look and learn on how we came about those results, which cooperative approaches did work, what is the best way to set up an experiment, how do we ensure that all the needs are being incorporated. And then last topic is connect. We do not limit ourselves to finding the optimal ways of cooperation, but we also seek to maintain, to strengthen, to expand the partnerships. TASLab 2050 is really a network where we can build on through these years. Next slide, please. So this is my last slide. I don't have so much time in this webinar, but in other webinars, you will learn more on what we will do in Antwerp, because we're now at the start of the Living Lab. But in the coming 2 years, we will work on 5 experiments, interventions that will work on the energy transition in Antwerp and to make it accessible. So in the SONNET, which is the working together between academics and city labs, we work on the question that you see below, like how and to what extent can social innovation contribute to a transition to more sustainable and affordable energy. So in Antwerp, we will use the already existing STADSLab 2050 framework and knowledge and network to work on this. And we will work on 5 concrete experiments. I have only time now to just say the topics, but go to the website and the coming webinars to learn and to hear more about it. The first thing we will do is connecting social housing initiative with an energy cooperative. Secondly, we will make energy efficient appliances accessible within an innovative leasing business model. 3, we will install a collective energy installation at a street level in a very socially mixed, with a very socially mixed public. 4, we will ensure and valorize the integration of local public and private energy services. We have our own eco-house, but we would like to work with partners around the eco-house to make it better and more integrated and accessible for vulnerable groups. And then lastly, we would like to explore the applicability of innovative business models for reaching the private rental market, because we see that there is a big challenge. Okay, this is it for now. I'm happy to answer questions and go to the website.
All right, thank you a lot, Jana. I think this was really inspiring to see what you can do at city level. It's quite broad and a good mix also, I believe. And I think also mirrored quite nicely our last poll with cooperation and exchange ranking quite high. And I think from your presentation, there was also a lot of cooperation and exchange to be seen. Having said this, I would also like to take in Julia and Donald now. And I hope our internet connection bears with us to have so much videos turned on. And then we would like to take up some of the questions that our audience has already sent to us. And Olga, maybe you can let us know what the questions are.
Yes, so we have already a first question, and it's directed to Jana. What kinds of interactions are generally produced in STADSLab in terms of cooperation, exchange, competition, or conflict? You already said a little bit about that, but perhaps you would like to dive a little bit deeper into this topic. And the question is from Jake Barnes.
Yeah, I think the obvious answer is cooperation. StatsLab 2050 is also complementary to other more regular policy that we have. For example, yeah, we have financing instruments, or we have legislative instruments which are maybe more in one of the other boxes that Julia talk to you about, but StatsLab is really on cooperation, because we know that if we would like to have the energy transition, a climate neutral city in 2050, that we cannot do this alone. So within StatsLab, we really take the cooperative approach. We try to support in any ways. We try to bring people, branches, different views together, but that's really the starting point. I think, of course, a city in other in other activities or in other policy related activities, they might fit into other boxes, but in StatsLab it's really on cooperation.
Okay, thank you for answering that. We have another question to Antwerp, actually, from Bernardo Fernandez. In the case of Antwerp, what is the role of the common labs? He's asking.
Of the what? Of the common labs?
Common labs, yeah.
I don't know if I understand the question.
I think perhaps it's about the living lab from the SONNET project.
Yeah. And what is the? I don't really understand the question good. I think maybe it's also a bit a semantic discussion sometimes. What is a lab? We with StatsLab, we always have the aim to do something on the ground in the city, which is visible, accessible, where we can report on, talk on, communicate on. So it's never something that stays only on paper or in. That's maybe what a living lab or an urban living lab, and it's on an urban level, so it's an urban living lab. And in SONNET, we will just do as we did in StatsLab for already since 2013, bring people together, think things out together, but then test them on the ground, make some new service, some new installation, some new business model to be tested. This can be sometimes only a prototype, but still there is something that we test on the ground.
Okay.
I don't know if that's an answer.
Thank you. I think we have another question about the StatsLab. I think this is probably the last one we can take right now during this Q&A slot. How many people or stakeholders participated in your StatsLab? Did you use a specific methodology to promote cooperation during meetings?
The amount, I think my colleague Gert, who is the one that started StatsLab in 2013, but is not here at the moment, can answer that better. But this must be like thousands of people, because the question is also when do you count somebody? We have always every new topic that we work on starts with a kickoff, which is physical meeting in an environment that brings people in an innovative cooperative mood. So we have different instruments, ways to make the workshops go to a goal. So we, Gert and his colleagues, because I'm rather new in this StatsLab, they have very innovative methodologies. For example, sometimes we have somebody that draws the idea. We always also go with storytelling, with different films, with different very inspiring methodologies to make people just get out of their daily working business as usual spirit and come to a very open way of thinking, design thinking. All these methodologies are used and tested. And there's also more information what we did always on the website and on the social media of StatsLab 2050, where we try to keep this community a living community.
Okay, thank you for these answers. I think for now we will finish our Q&A slot, but we will have another round of questions at the end of this webinar. And for now, I'll pass the mic to Nicholas.
Thank you, Olga. Yeah, I think these were some really interesting questions, and as Olga just said, we'll have more time at the end. But for now, I would like to thank Julia and Jana for coming in here for the Q&A, and I would take you back in at the end. And Donald will stay with us now. And we'll have our third and last presentation for today. So Donald Brown is a research fellow in renewable electricity business models at the University of Leeds. And he works in the EU project Prosumers in the Energy Union, in short ProSero. So prosumers, that's also a term we heard already in Julia's presentation, and he will focus on this approach in his speech. And besides being a researcher, he's also a director at the Sustainable Design Collective, which is a collective of architects and environmental and construction professionals who provide sustainable building solutions. So I think there's some practical experience in there as well, which might be interesting for the discussion. And yeah, he will enrich our discussion by sharing insights on mainstreaming prosumer business models. And with this, Donald, I would like to hand over to you.
Thanks, Nicholas.
I'm curious to hear your speech. Thanks.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for that introduction. So the format of this presentation has been changed, so I hope I still recognize it. And it's a real privilege to speak to such a large group of people. We had a ProSero webinar last week, which I thought was well attended. I think about 45 attendees, and this one has even more. So it's good to be part of this brave new world. So I'm now hoping I have some control. Okay, is that working? I'm not sure if that was me or if that was you, Nicholas. I'm not sure I am able to control the slides.
That was me, but maybe just try now.
Okay. Yeah, okay. Okay. So yes, thanks. So yes, you've already introduced the ProSero project quite nicely. It's another EU-funded research project with 11 project partners from 7 countries. And as you say, the aim is to sort of understand the mainstreaming of the renewable energy prosumer phenomenon in the EU. I'll explain a bit more about that in a minute. Our work package between the Universities of Leeds and Leuphana are leading on the business models and finance element. We have recently released a report, Business Models for Prosumers in Europe, which if you Google, you should be able to find. That's the front cover there. I probably should have given you a link. Yeah, and that identified around 15 different business model archetypes that are being trialed across different prosumer situations and contexts across Europe. So Julia Whitmire is also a colleague on the project at Drift. You can see a number of the other organizations involved, including eClay actually down on the bottom there. So yeah, I am able to control it, which is good. So what are prosumers? The concept originates from a book by a guy called Alvin Toffler, The Third Wave, which was focused on this kind of latest new age of capitalist development, or the third wave of capitalist development, where basically we're moving from an industrialized economy actually to an economy where people start to produce their own goods and services again, and that is enabled by the information age. So in the context of energy transitions, this is actors who both produce and consume renewable energy, but also actually potentially modulate their demand through things like demand side response. So if we think about the electricity system, the traditional electricity system, which is centralized using a high voltage transmission network and large power stations. More recently, we've had kind of increasingly distributed energy systems where smaller scale sites of generation, solar and wind farms connected to the distribution network. And a kind of third layer down is this idea of the prosumer energy system. So sites of energy generation basically connected to the ultra low voltage network, often behind the meter, often attached to buildings, actually where you're producing and consuming at the same time and may not even interact with the public network at all. So that's the kind of material definition that we'll use in the project, and hopefully will inform other things I have to say. So the other two concepts I just wanted to introduce are this idea of business models. So business models describe basically the nature of value delivered to customers or users, how organizations and networks create that value, and how revenue is captured from those activities. So it's a broader concept than just the financial model, which I think people often kind of conflate that purely financial element of a business model with some of these wider and potentially slightly softer but equally important aspects. The other concept I wanted to introduce is this notion of governance. So the institutions and mechanisms and processes through which economic, political and administrative authority is exercised. And actually governance is not just a political thing, it occurs within organizations and networks. So those two are quite core to our thinking on the project, and I'll introduce some examples of how these different variables are changing in our living lab case study. Oops, oh dear, it's a bit skittish this. So we are ourselves undertaking a living lab in the city of Bristol in England, and basically we're focusing on 3 different modes of governance in that living lab through 3 different actor types. So there is Bristol Energy Co-op, who are a community energy company, as we would describe in the UK, a kind of traditional community energy actor. There is the municipality, who own their own municipal energy company, which is quite unusual in the UK. Municipalities tend to not be very much involved in energy governance at all, in fact, and so there's a few of these new municipal startup companies sort of entering the market. And then there's OVO Energy, who are a Bristol-based energy company, who probably embody the traditional market type of governance, you know, a traditional private energy supplier. And we find these cases quite interesting, particularly not only in terms of how they are governed, but actually the business models that they are looking to adopt, and that's what I'll talk about next. So clearly the community governance approach, familiar to many of you, this idea of citizen participation, often run by charities or cooperatives, often one member, one vote, so they are directly democratic, so no one actor has more power than anyone else. They're often raising finance through community crowdfunding, equity share offers using crowdfunding platforms where everyone owns a very small stake of some kind of energy project, and they tend to favour business models which actually maximise local value retention, such as microgrids. So if we think about the microgrid concept, and there's various examples of these now being trialled, particularly as subsidies for renewable energy consumption are reduced in the UK and elsewhere. So this idea of a privately owned distribution network, trying to maximise self-consumption of self-generated renewable energy behind the meter, so actually pushing the place where the meter is located on the site to the outside of the site, and having more sites of self-consumption, perhaps a number of houses or a private wire arrangement with someone who's using the electricity, perhaps creating some kind of a virtual energy company. So there's potentially some avoidance of network charges because you're consuming behind the meter. So really this emphasis on local value retention and retaining as much value within this small area of the network as possible. We're finding that this is quite popular. These kind of concepts are quite popular with community actors who are looking to have a post-subsidy business model. So if we think about municipal governance, clearly these are often local authority owned. Again, that's quite a new development in the UK, more common elsewhere in Europe. In the case of Bristol Energy, they were created by elected officials. The mayor brought this company into being, and so they're kind of answerable to the traditional representative democracy of local elections. They're often funded through municipal taxes, so in the UK's case, council tax. They may also be able to borrow through things like municipal bonds. In the case of Bristol Energy, profits are reinvested, actually, so the profit share is directly reinvested by the local authority into other local authority projects. And so our argument is that tends to favour business models which kind of maximise social value. And so in the case of Bristol, they've been trying a domestic energy service model, which I'll explain a bit more about, which is basically trying to alleviate fuel poverty and make energy consumers' lives easier by providing heat as a service. So this idea of a domestic energy service company, now ESCOs are a relatively old idea, although historically they have operated in the private sector, usually for large, well, they've been run by the private sector and often consulting to universities and larger clients, basically. But as we see a sort of evolution of metering and Internet of Things technology, these solutions are becoming increasingly viable at a smaller scale. So the idea here is that potentially multiple energy vectors, so potentially solar electricity, hot water, heat being sold as a service, so paying a single payment for a guaranteed level of service and actually disengaging from your relationship with paying for kilowatt hours of gas or electricity, potentially just paying a flat fee throughout the year or monthly. The ESCO will manage the assets on your behalf, so your rooftop solar installation or your heat pump or whatever kit you have in the house, and may indeed own them in some cases. So what this is doing is potentially driving efficiency in the delivery of these energy services, and therefore kind of wider decarbonisation, and also potentially addressing things like the fuel poverty agenda. I know that's particularly where Bristol Energy are sort of placing much of their attention, is trying to basically improve the quality of the housing stock in the city and actually reduce the amount of energy being used, which one might argue is relatively counterintuitive for an energy company whose business is selling people energy. So finally, this notion of market governance, which should be quite familiar to all of you if we study the energy system since, you know, the 1990s and the liberalisation agenda. Most energy companies in the EU certainly are now in private hands. What is quite interesting is that actually many of these traditional actors are now entering this prosumer market with things like vehicle to grid chargers, other, you know, heat pumps, heat batteries, things like this. But the corporate governance model of these organisations is largely the same as the traditional utility. So private and privately held or publicly listed firms where shares are traded on the stock market, often financed through share equity and bank debt in the normal kind of corporate finance world. Here an emphasis on IoT-enabled devices, EVs, heat pumps, batteries, and basically trying to integrate these systems and manage them potentially over even a national scale. So really that pushes you towards business models that are designed to achieve scale economies and basically aggregate multiple points of flexibility and deliver value to the system. So this kind of brings forward this idea of a domestic aggregator or a virtual power plant. So here a relatively sophisticated actor will manage multiple assets in people's homes, participate in flexibility and ancillary service markets, so day-ahead trades as well, potentially in the wholesale markets, but also things like the balancing mechanism and frequency response. Obviously promoting kind of domestic demand response and virtual power plant concepts, potentially also vehicle to grid concepts. And really directly controlling these assets, potentially with little involvement from the homeowner or the user. So that obviously requires an aggregator, which is, requires quite a level of sophistication, and there's a potential new revenue streams available with DSOs. So OVO in Bristol have been trialling these models with smart heat and battery propositions, and are also working with Nissan on a vehicle to grid model. So to conclude, really, all three of these different modes of governance are actually looking to promote a low carbon, decentralized prosumer future, although they adopt quite different logics to how value is delivered. So if we think about the community governance model, clearly emphasizing community value, empowering citizens, giving them agency through ownership and control, and potentially also profits. So that pushes you towards business models that where local value is prioritized, and you know, concepts like the microgrid. The municipal governance model, the emphasis more here is on social value, or how the public sector would traditionally define social value. So issues around poverty, distributional equity, and the left behind, focusing on vulnerable groups, potentially those who are less likely to have the financial and cultural capital to be involved in community energy projects. So clearly, yes, business models that are emphasizing that social value, where the ownership is public and profits may be socialized, and this, we argue, is pushing them towards thinking about ESCO type concepts. And the final example, obviously, is this traditional kind of market governance approach where scale economies and network effects are seen as very important, delivering efficiencies and decision making largely on the basis of price, market price, and therefore business models which emphasize kind of the market value and market share of the business, traditional kind of corporate ownership structures, and profits delivered to shareholders in that traditional way. And that seems to be tending in a number of cases towards this concept of a kind of big domestic aggregator who may aggregate prosumer systems and flexible assets. So that was all I had to say on prosumer business models, and I would appreciate hearing any questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Donald. That was very insightful, for me at least. Quite a few informations, and yeah, nice work also done here, I think. So now we'll turn to our final and larger Q&A session with all our speakers involved. So I will invite Jana and Julia back in. And yeah, I hope our audience has some good questions that are trying to tie all of these three speeches together, how business models, the city level, and the social innovation perspective can kind of bring us some new or inspiring ideas for yeah, large-scale energy transitions. So Olga, let's hear what you received.
Yeah, I think we may wait for these kind of questions, the bridging questions, for the end of this Q&A session, because meanwhile I received a couple of questions for Donald. One is, I'm wondering how the cooperation works between some of the examples you gave and the network operators. How do they manage investment for developing or maintenance of the grid?
Should I go?
Yeah.
So I took two parts from your question there. There was the cooperation between the three actors that I presented, and then the question around network operators. I think on the first part, if I've understood it correctly, there is actually a reasonable amount of cooperation going on between the municipal and community sectors in Bristol, I think partly as a result of relatively progressive and engaged local political environment there, basically, which I think is not always true in other parts of the UK, certainly, that there is an appetite to work with the community energy groups because they have delivered quite a lot of investment, engagement, and just kind of raised the profile of the energy transition. And I think the municipalities are looking to piggyback onto that. However, and my colleague sat next to me actually works for this company, so I should be careful what I say. But however, that OVO are clearly now a very large and sophisticated actor. They are valued at over £1 billion. So they've almost grown out of the city of Bristol that they've grown up in, and are now a major player on the, I think they're now the second largest UK energy retailer since they purchased the retail arm of SSE, Scottish and Southern Electrical. So there's somewhat of a mismatch in the scales there, and I think there's perhaps less collaboration between OVO and the other two. I think, sadly, actually, we were about to run a Living Lab event on the 6th of April, where it was our final event, big event with about 80 different actors in Bristol, where we were going to potentially try and see where the crossovers lie, because there's a huge amount of technical market sophistication in an actor like OVO, which I think could really be brought to bear on some of these local challenges. And I think that there is a need to work together more potentially than they are afforded to, perhaps by that kind of commercial outlook. On the DNO question, I think it's a similar one, but I think traditionally, and maybe this kind of leads into it, I think traditionally, so I think it's Western Power Distribution in Bristol, who are meant to be one of the more progressive and sort of innovative DNOs in the UK, have been doing quite a lot and quite a number of trials with different different actors in this space. But again, given their size, they tend to seem to be more comfortable working with a large actor like OVO than they would with a small actor like Bristol Energy Co-op. I think, again, that mismatch perhaps works the other way in that, you know, a corporate organization, because the DSOs in the UK are privately owned, is more comfortable potentially liaising with a big player, a big energy supplier, and you know, they speak the same language. So I think there is a potential difficulty for the smaller players in actually finding themselves some space to get DSOs to run trials with them, or, you know, sort of some of these new revenue streams that DSOs are looking to offer with local flexibility. It's maybe harder to access if you're a smaller and less sophisticated actor.
Okay, thank you for this answer. We have another question. It's quite long, so let me read it to you.
Maybe
The
just
latest...
just very briefly for everyone, because the webinar was planned to go until 12, but I think we're good to go just 5 to 10 minutes more to have some discussion and really use the opportunity just to let everybody know. Thanks.
Yeah. So the latest insights from climate psychology is that we did not act for a long time because of our defense mechanisms. We avoid anxiety. Dr. René Lertzmann calls it the myth of apathy. Almost no one wants ecological destruction. It makes the strategies of working together, learning together more effective than competition and conflict. Do you use the insights of climate psychology? Perhaps, Julia, you could try to take on this question.
Thanks for the question. No, we have a very short answer. I'm going to pick it up from the chat to see what this is about. We have been basing it mainly on sociological work rather than on psychology up to now. But we will also, so what I presented is basically a draft typology, and we are now looking into what can be substantiated, what can we unpack, how can we merge, and all of that will be taking place over the next 2 years. So any insights you have and you think could help us in doing that, I'm very happy if you share that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, how suitable would VPP-like business models be able to capture the benefits stemming from policy support mechanisms, namely from competitive tendering schemes in the forms of renewable energy auctions? Perhaps, Donald, would you like to?
Yeah. So in theory, yes. If you had some kind of power purchase agreement that was long term, and I mean, it again, because if the VPP, so say there was a large aggregator who was owning a load of battery and PV assets, for example, and you had a power purchase agreement in place to guarantee you long-term revenue for whenever you were selling into the wholesale market or something, then yes, that could be a revenue source for you. I think the question is if you were if the assets were owned privately by individuals, whether you'd be able to negotiate that kind of arrangement on an individual level. It kind of again pushes you towards, you know, having lots and lots of distributed assets owned by a big corporation or a big entity, which, yeah, in theory that would work, but then you feel like, well, how is the prosumer benefiting? Which is part of the kind of the tension, I think, with a lot of these concepts, is they take agency and control and potentially ownership away from small individual groups. They have the potential to do that. So.
Okay, thanks. It seems like we have another one to Donald. Is there any way to balance community-owned and municipal local government In the UK, at least, the term social value would tend to be redefined according to political intent and government funding. To put it in another way, when things are good, surplus can be redistributed to community needs. When things are tough, this redistribution could occur towards less social needs or servicing debt. Community-owned shouldn't have this problem, but they also may not have the scale expertise. Would you like to comment on that?
I think that's right. I think that I mean, Bristol Energy, as far as I know, haven't made a profit yet. They're still trying to repay back the loan that was provided to them by the local authority, the municipal authority. If you're sort of saying, is there a potential for, well, to basically be plugging budgets elsewhere? You know, if there's austerity elsewhere in the system, would the municipally owned energy company be used to kind of cross-subsidize other aspects of a council's budget that maybe were being underfunded? I think in a way that was potentially the intention behind some of these more entrepreneurial activities that councils are doing, because we've been in such an environment of austerity in the UK for so long at the local authority level. Yes, and I think the community interests generally are so different, aren't they? And the ways that, in my own experience of community energy projects, you know, the ways that community benefit has to be distributed, often on specific projects that come along potentially with a subsidy, an agreement for a grant, or something that you have to spend some money on a fuel poverty project. In some cases, you have more choice over how community benefits are shared, but it is quite I think they have quite different objectives in a way. Yeah, sorry, it's quite a complex question. Probably requires a bit more of a complex answer, but I'll shut up in the interest of time.
Thanks a lot. I have now a question to Jana. The question is solving energy poverty a precondition for a successful energy transition?
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
As I also showed you the figures of Antwerp, that we have estimation between 20 and 30% of our families that are suffering from one of the three definitions of energy poverty, as I explained. I think it is, in a way. I mean, certainly for local authorities like Antwerp, with a very diverse public, with all different problems to be able to contribute to the energy transition, and this is not only financial. Also, as I said, we have cultural language barriers. Also, things like ownership, the rental market, the private rental market is a problem, as I said. And yes, I think if we do not invest our energy in having everybody, giving everybody the ability to work together in the energy transition, we will not solve the problem, no. And as maybe also Donald said, the private sector will not solve this problem. There are no business models that we can just pick and implement for these groups. We know that, as I said, the energy transition will cost money, is expensive, and certainly if we like to involve all these groups, I think public funding or public energy, like having staff to help all these families to make changes in their lives that help them out of the problematic situation of energy poverty, are necessary, yes.
Okay, thank you for this. I think we are heading to our last question because we're running out of time, unfortunately. Julia, we would like to know whether research helps social innovations work and maybe to connect them as a network. I think it applies to kind of next steps. What happens after you now provided us with this fantastic research and typology of social innovations in the energy sector?
Thank you for that question. I think that research can play different roles in working with social innovations and with these kind of initiatives. One is providing through giving access to research funding, providing municipalities with the opportunity to actually try out and experiment and learn from these experiments, as we do with Jana in Antwerp and also all the other cities. We do the same, as Dawn said, in the Procure project. So I think that's really one of the roles that research can take. Another one is also in terms of bringing people together, because researchers, some of us tend to have an overview of the field and who is active, and connect people. We try to do that also in the Procure project through kind of a LinkedIn community of prosumer initiatives. Yes, and I think it's also for researchers to provide legitimacy for practitioners and policymakers that are basically trying out new ideas, and to basically base it in sound research so that they can go on doing and have a good legitimization to do so. Yeah, I think that's just some ideas on how we could go from there. Within the SONNET project, we are doing this within the 6 city labs, as we have, as Niklas has explained. I think that's the main focus that we have, and we will continue having these kind of discussions online for now, but also we hope offline and in person again in due course. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for answering. I see Niklas appeared on my screen. It means that I need to pass my mic back to Niklas. Thank you for this Q&A final session.
Yes, thank you a lot, Olga, as well, for this nice moderation. So yeah, with a look to the watch, I think we'll have to wrap it up here. Yeah, I want to thank, first of all, our 3 speakers for these great presentations and the insights into their work, be it research or be it practical experimentation and support of social innovations. And also, yeah, I also want to thank all our audience for joining us here today and for listening in, and also for actively participating in all the polls and Q&A sessions. I think this was good and as deep as we could go in 1 hour of a webinar. I know it's always too short, but I think we got some inspiration from this. So with this, again, thank you all, and let's stay in touch. If you want to, you can visit our Twitter or our website. And of course, you can also sign up to receive email updates from Sonnet. If you want to do that, you just go to the website, and on the starting page, you scroll down a little bit and you'll find a subscription field, and then we'll have you on our list and keep you posted also for the upcoming webinars, because we've planned some more, so stay tuned, I would say. And last but not least, we would also like to have some feedback, which can be collected right at the end or via email later. You'll receive another follow-up email for this webinar, and we would just like to know, how did you like this, and maybe also if there's specific themes that you would be interested in for the future. And with this, yeah, I say goodbye from my side and hope to see you again, and stay healthy and enjoy the day as good as possible. Bye-bye.